Michael, I have some exciting news, Richard Thornton announced as I entered his corner office on one that I'd assumed would be the day of my promotion announcement. The regional director position had been vacant for 6 weeks since Patricia Williams retired, and everyone knew I was the obvious successor. 15 years at Meridian Industries, consistent performance reviews, 3 major client acquisitions this quarter alone. The role was mine by every measurable standard. Instead, Richard gestured toward the young man sitting in the chair across from his desk, a kid who looked barely old enough to have graduated college, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't disguise his obvious discomfort. "I'd like you to meet our new regional director of operations, Tyler Thornton." The surname hit me like a physical blow, though I kept my expression neutral. His son, Richard, was promoting his 26-year-old son, fresh from his MBA program and exactly 18 months of work experience at a competitor, to the position I'd been working toward for half a decade. "Tyler brings fresh perspectives and innovative thinking to the role," Richard continued, oblivious to my internal reaction. "I'm sure you'll provide excellent support during his transition." I nodded once, shook Tyler's sweaty palm, and congratulated him with perfect professionalism. What Richard didn't realize, as he smugly outlined Tyler's qualifications, was that I'd spent the last 4 months in careful, strategic conversations with 3 key board members. Not complaints or office politics, but substantive discussions about the company's direction, market challenges, and leadership deficiencies. Patricia Williams' retirement hadn't been unexpected, and neither had my systematic cultivation of board relationships. By the time I left Richard's office, my phone was already buzzing with a text from board member Eleanor Hartfield. "Emergency board meeting tonight, 7 p.m. Your presence requested. My name is Michael Davidson, 42 years old, and until that morning, I was the senior operations manager at Meridian Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company specializing in automotive components. I'd built my career there methodically, starting as a junior analyst straight from Northwestern's business program, and advancing through every level of operations management. Unlike many of my peers who jumped between companies chasing quick promotions, I'd stayed at Meridian because I believed in the company's potential and saw opportunities to make meaningful contributions to its growth. That loyalty had served me well. Consistent promotions, increasing responsibilities, and the respect of colleagues who understood that my steady presence provided stability in an otherwise volatile industry. My relationship with Richard Thornton, however, had always been complicated. He'd been promoted to CEO 3 years ago, largely based on his sales background and his ability to charm both clients and the board during presentations. What he lacked was operational depth, the kind of detailed understanding of manufacturing processes, supply chain management, and quality control that keeps a company functioning effectively. That's where I came in. For 3 years, I'd essentially been running day-to-day operations while Richard focused on high-level strategy and external relationships. It was an arrangement that worked well for the company, less well for my own advancement. The warning signs about Richard's character had appeared gradually. Small instances of taking credit for successful initiatives I'd developed, casual dismissals of my input during senior staff meetings, followed by private requests for detailed implementation plans. Most telling was his treatment of long-term employees who possessed institutional knowledge but lacked the political skills to protect themselves. Good people found themselves marginalized or pushed out, replaced by Richard's chosen candidates, who prioritized loyalty over competence. I'd been documenting these patterns for months, not out of any immediate plan for action, but because my analytical nature compelled me to track organizational dynamics the same way I tracked production metrics. Problems that go unmeasured tend to worsen, whether in manufacturing or management. The opportunity to address these concerns directly had emerged from months ago when Eleanor Hartfield approached me after a quarterly presentation. Eleanor was the longest-serving board member, a former manufacturing executive herself, who understood the technical complexities of our business better than most of the other directors. She'd complimented my analysis of supply chain vulnerabilities, then asked if I'd be willing to provide occasional consulting to the board on operational matters. Richard gives excellent strategic overviews, she'd said carefully, but sometimes we need more granular detail about actual capabilities and constraints. I'd agreed, recognizing both the professional opportunity and the potential risks. Over the following months, I'd provided the board with detailed assessments of our manufacturing efficiency, quality control procedures, and competitive positioning. Always professional, always focused on business realities rather than personalities or office politics. But the subtext was clear. While Richard painted optimistic pictures of company performance, the operational reality was more complex and often more challenging than his presentation suggested. These interactions had been entirely proper and above board. I wasn't undermining my boss through gossip or personal attacks. I was providing technical expertise the board needed to make informed decisions. Still, I'd been careful to keep these consultations confidential, understanding that Richard wouldn't appreciate board members receiving unfiltered operational data. Now, walking toward the conference room where the emergency board meeting would convene, I realized that months of careful relationship building had positioned me perfectly for this moment, not because I'd anticipated Tyler's nepotistic promotion, but because I'd established credibility with the people who ultimately controlled company direction. The emergency board meeting was smaller than usual, just 5 of the 7 members, but including the most influential ones. Eleanor Hartfield chaired the session, with David Chen, finance background, Margaret Foster, former automotive industry executive, Robert Walsh, legal and governance expert, and surprisingly, Thomas Meridian himself, the company founder's son, who rarely attended routine meetings. Michael, Eleanor began without preamble, we need your honest assessment of today's announcement regarding the regional director position. I'd prepared for this moment during the drive over, outlining exactly what I could say factually without crossing into personal criticism. The position requires deep operational knowledge, proven leadership experience, and established relationships with key clients and suppliers. These capabilities typically develop over years of progressive responsibility within the industry. And Mr. Tyler Thornton's qualifications. David Chen asked directly, 18 months at Morrison Components, MBA from Duke. No direct experience with our specific manufacturing processes or client base. I paused, then added the crucial detail. Morrison is significantly smaller than Meridian, with different operational complexities and market positioning. Margaret Foster leaned forward. In your professional opinion, what would be the likely impact of this appointment on department performance? This was the moment that required careful navigation. Too diplomatic, and I'd failed to communicate the real risks. Too critical, and I'd appear to be making a personal attack. Based on historical patterns, leadership transitions work best when new directors have either deep technical knowledge or extensive management experience to compensate for learning curves. When both are absent, performance typically suffers. During the adaptation period. How long an adaptation period? Thomas Meridian asked quietly. For someone with relevant experience, typically 6 to 12 months. For someone without either technical background or management experience, 18 months to 3 years. During that time, department efficiency often declines 15 to 20% while mistakes and missteps are corrected. The numbers hit home. Everyone in the room understood that Meridian couldn't afford an 18-month learning curve in such a critical position, especially with our largest client contract up for renewal next quarter. Eleanor asked the question I'd been waiting for. Michael, what would you need to support Mr. Thornton during this transition while maintaining operational efficiency? That assumes the transition proceeds as planned. I replied carefully. If the board determines that's the best course for the company, I would recommend a structured mentoring arrangement with clearly defined responsibilities and regular performance reviews. And if the board determined a different course, Robert Walsh inquired, then I would be prepared to discuss alternative approaches that better serve company interests, I said, meeting his gaze directly. The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions about market conditions, upcoming client renewals, and competitive pressures. Throughout, it became clear that the board had serious concerns about Richard's judgment and the potential impact of his decision on company performance. My months of providing operational context had prepared them to understand why this promotion represented more than simple nepotism. It was a strategic error that could significantly harm the business. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor made a remarkable statement. The board will be conducting a comprehensive review of organizational structure and leadership effectiveness. Michael, we may need extensive consultation during this process. I nodded, understanding the implications. I'm available whenever needed. Driving home, I reflected on the evening's developments. I hadn't orchestrated Tyler's promotion or manipulated the board into this position. Instead, I'd simply established relationships, provided expertise when requested, and responded honestly when asked direct questions. The situation was unfolding based on business realities, not personal grievances. The next morning brought a series of carefully choreographed conversations. First, Eleanor called Richard to schedule a special board session for Friday, ostensibly to discuss quarterly performance, but actually to address leadership concerns. Second, I received a call from Margaret Foster requesting detailed documentation of current operational procedures and recent performance metrics. Third, Tyler stopped by my office. Clearly overwhelmed by responsibilities he was beginning to understand he wasn't prepared for. Dad said, "You'd help me get up to speed," he said, sitting across from my desk with an expression that mixed entitlement with genuine concern. "I've been reading through the files, but there's a lot here I don't fully understand. This conversation requires delicate handling." Tyler himself wasn't the enemy. He was a young professional who'd accepted an opportunity offered by his father, probably without fully grasping its implications. My anger was directed at Richard's poor judgment, not at Tyler's inexperience. The role involves complex coordination between manufacturing, quality control, supply chain management, and client relations, I explained, pulling out organizational charts and process flow charts. Each area has specific technical requirements and established procedures that have developed over years of operational refinement. As I walked him through the department structure, Tyler's expression grew increasingly troubled. "How long do you think it would take me to really understand all this?" "With dedicated focus and mentoring, probably 2 to 3 years to reach full competency," I answered honestly. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you think I'm qualified for this job?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. I studied his face, seeing genuine concern rather than defensive arrogance. "I think you have potential to develop into the role eventually. The question is whether the timing is right for you, or for the company." Dad said I needed to sink or swim, that real leaders figure things out as they go. "That's one approach," I said carefully. "Another approach is ensuring leaders have the foundation necessary to succeed before placing them in critical positions." Our conversation was interrupted by Richard's assistant calling Tyler to an urgent meeting. After he left, I spent the afternoon preparing comprehensive documentation for the board, not accusations or personal complaints, but detailed analysis of operational requirements, current performance metrics, and risk assessment for various leadership scenarios. The Friday board meeting changed everything. Richard arrived expecting a routine quarterly review and instead faced a systematic examination of his recent decisions, particularly the regional director appointment. The board had clearly coordinated their approach, asking specific questions about succession planning, performance metrics, and strategic alignment. I was asked to present my operational analysis, which I did with clinical precision. No personal attacks, no emotional appeals, just data showing how leadership transitions impact performance, historical patterns of successful versus unsuccessful promotions, and detailed requirements for the regional director role. When the presentation concluded, Thomas Meridian asked Richard directly, "Walk us through your reasoning for the Tyler appointment. What specific qualifications and achievements led to this decision?" Richard's answer revealed the weakness of his position. He spoke about fresh perspectives and innovative thinking and dynasty building, all concepts that sounded impressive, but had no concrete foundation in Tyler's actual experience or demonstrated capabilities. Margaret Foster then asked the crushing question, "Given our upcoming client renewals and competitive pressures, can we afford an 18-month learning curve?" In this critical position, the silence that followed made Richard's position clear. He'd made a decision based on personal preference rather than business judgment, and the board was no longer willing to accept that approach. What happened next unfolded quickly. The board called a special session for the following Monday to discuss organizational restructuring. Over the weekend, I received calls from headhunters who'd somehow learned about potential changes at Meridian. Eleanor Hartfield also called, asking if I'd be available for an extended consultation regarding the regional director position and broader operational leadership. The Monday board meeting lasted 6 hours. I wasn't present for most of it, but the outcome was decisive. Richard would remain as CEO, but with reduced authority over operational decisions. Tyler would be reassigned to a junior management role with appropriate mentoring and development opportunities. The regional director position would be filled immediately by someone with relevant experience and proven capabilities. That someone, the board unanimously decided, was me. Tuesday morning, I walked into what was now my office. The regional director position I'd worked toward for years, finally achieved through a combination of competence, patience, and strategic relationship building. Tyler stopped by before noon, looking relieved rather than resentful. "I owe you an apology," he said, "and probably a thank you. I was in way over my head, and I think we both knew it. You'll develop the capabilities over time," I replied. "The junior management role will give you the foundation you need to eventually advance." He nodded thoughtfully. "Dad's not happy about how this turned out. Your father made a decision based on personal feelings rather than business judgment." I said, "The board's responsibility is to the company and its shareholders, not to anyone's personal preferences." 6 months later, the transition had proven successful by every measurable standard. Operational efficiency improved 12% in my first quarter as regional director. We successfully renewed our largest client contract and secured significant new accounts. Tyler was progressing well in his junior role, gaining real experience and developing the competencies he'd eventually need for advancement. Richard and I maintained a professional working relationship, though with clear boundaries. He focused on external strategy and client development, areas where his strengths were genuine. I handled operational leadership, drawing on 15 years of experience and institutional knowledge. The most satisfying outcome was organizational. The board's intervention had sent a clear message that merit-based decisions were expected at all levels. Other managers began taking development planning more seriously, understanding that advancement required demonstrated competence rather than personal connections. Eleanor Hartfield summed it up during my 6-month performance review. "He handled a difficult situation with remarkable professionalism. You didn't attack Richard or Tyler personally, you didn't engage in office politics, and you didn't make threats or ultimatums. You simply provided the information needed for good decision-making and positioned yourself as the obvious solution." Looking back, I realized that my months of board consultation hadn't been strategic maneuvering in the traditional sense. I'd been doing what I always did, providing accurate information and building relationships based on competence and reliability. When Richard's poor judgment created a crisis, those relationships and that credibility became powerful tools for organizational correction. My CEO handed my director position to his unqualified son. But what he didn't know was that I'd been meeting with the board for months, not plotting against him, but establishing credibility and providing expertise. When his nepotistic decision threatened company performance, the board had the information and relationships necessary to intervene effectively. The outcome wasn't revenge or political maneuvering. It was simply the logical result of aligning responsibilities with capabilities, just as any well-designed system should function. In the end, Richard's son got appropriate development opportunities. Richard kept his role, but with better defined boundaries. I advanced based on merit and preparation, and the company avoided the costly mistakes that often result from nepotistic decision-making. Sometimes the most effective strategy is manipulation or confrontation, but simply ensuring that decision-makers have access to accurate information when they need it most.